All right. So I am super excited about this one. For our listeners out there, I somewhat, meet. I met up with her a while back, and she joined the same program that I did when I first started this journey. And it's been so cool to see her evolution of where she's come and where she is now, but even more so to hear her stories. So, and I said this in other pods. I think a lot of the people and guests that I'm having on, I'm definitely a fanboy of. So, Abby, welcome to
Oh.
the pod. I'm a huge fanboy of yours.
Well, thanks so much. That means so much to me. I feel like the feeling is mutual, so I have a lot
Yeah.
of respect for you.
Oh, this is going to be great. Abby, so a couple things that I wanted to touch on before we kind of get into your story. So you're in Colorado right now, right?
Yes.
Okay. Um, so my wife has this like huge infatuation with Colorado. I think she's maybe been once, but she like wants to move there. And as I'm going through a lot of your content, it seems like you're just a person that really loves to be outside, which I definitely share that. What do you enjoy most about Colorado?
Yeah, the outdoors. I mean, being in the mountains or being able to like have access to the mountains within a few hours and
Yeah.
it's pretty incredible to like go out there and be in nature and it could be anything from like you just relax and just kind of enjoy it to you can
Yeah.
challenge yourself and do some extreme outdoor activities.
Yeah. And it also seems too that you have a little companion with you at all times, which for me, like I'm a new dog owner. So our puppy is about 10 months old. Um,
Oh,
and so like
what
trying
kind
to
of dog
train
is
him.
she? Oh,
So he is like a mixture of like a thousand things. So we actually
okay.
got him out of a like adoption agency out of a litter in Mexico. So like he's all the things, but he looks like a miniature black lab. So um I'm told he's a very, very beautiful boy. So he's just really hard to train. I say that because I really want what you have in a lot of ways because it seems like you take your dog everywhere. So what's your dog's name?
Molly.
Molly? Okay. All
Oh
right.
she's like my best friend and she's my first dog. So like I grew up with
Really?
yeah, and I have two cats and I always got teased and people would call me like the cat lady, but so she's my first dog and I'm just like why did nobody ever tell me how amazing it is to have like
Yeah.
this companion, but it's cool and maybe when we talk a little bit more about my story to like I don't know to go from like super competitive athlete to now I don't know now I get like really fulfilled and I feel like super happy just getting outside with her and
Yeah.
having her like do these different adventures and just watching her kind of like I don't know hit these summits that it's not about me anymore, it's just having fun.
It's about that connection. So, well, Abby, I mean, that's a good transition. So let's kind of start back a little bit of um, telling your story. So, like, obviously, with our listeners, I just gave a little bit of an intro prior to the start of the pod. So, if you could introduce yourself and then just start with your story, because it's one that I really think our listeners would really get a lot of value from.
Sure. My name is Abby McQuenney Penamonte, and like Dezi mentioned, I'm in Parker, Colorado, so right outside of Denver. But I grew up a runner and got into like marathon running, and then after I did several marathons, I just wanted to like test my body more. And like different books inspire people, and I had read
Mhm.
some books about like ultra marathons and decided to like give it a go with some ultras and
Yeah.
it's one of those things where like yeah you run a marathon you want to do more. I ran like my first 50 miler and I wanted to do my first 100 miler.
Oh my
um,
gosh.
so got into like 100-mile racing and then kind of started to dabble with like different like nutrition protocols and kind of got involved in like this low carb endurance running and I always say like it worked really well until it didn't work. But
Yeah.
but I had a really great season in 2013 and I competed in the Grand Slam of Ultra Running. So that is a race series that's 4 100-mile races within a 10-week span of time.
Oh my
So
God.
I know. So hindsight is 2020, right? Like I can see
Yeah.
now where like the disconnect is, but had an awesome season, did really great, felt really great. And then the side effect of putting my body through that on such
Yeah.
a low carb and probably just in general like really low calorie, like very restrictive
Yeah.
nutrition. The side effect was just, adrenal fatigue, which
Hmm.
is not called adrenal fatigue now, I guess, but it
Yeah.
was just burnout, so
Yeah.
overtraining, everything from like thyroid issues, blood sugar issues, energy issues, sleeping issues, the whole gamut.
Yeah.
So I kind of eventually had to like mourn the loss of running. I felt like
Yeah.
it was really hard for me. I really struggled in that time of my life with like balance. So I
Yeah.
was very much like all or none. And I couldn't find that balance where, people were telling me to like slow down and do less. And
Yeah.
I just had that tendency to like push things to the extreme. And,
Hmm.
if I was going to go out and run, I was going to go out and run for like hours and hours. But eventually I got to that point where like my body just physically couldn't run anymore. So I kind of had to walk away from that. And, basically it was either all or I said it's none. So I
Yeah.
said no more running. And then that's when I got involved in strength training. So I had worked at a gym for, a decade and never touched a weight in my life. And at that point, like, I had done tons of research and being a registered dietitian, right? We know that, strength training is so therapeutic for
It
hormones and
is. Yeah.
thyroid, sex hormones, stuff like that. So I got involved in strength training. And initially for me, it was really just to help me like go to sleep every night. I struggled
Yeah.
with insomnia
Yeah.
from the burnout, and so I realized that every time I lifted weights, relatively heavy weights, I could fall asleep at night. So that was like a
Yeah.
huge victory for me. And then it became kind of that, I want more. This is actually kind of fun.
Yeah.
Initially, it felt like it was like a chore. Like I didn't, I missed running and I wanted to keep running. But I eventually kind of fell in love with strength training and I wanted to be better. And I realized that like the low carb lifestyle that I had before and like the
Yeah.
calorie restriction I had before, I quickly learned like that just wasn't going to work with my lifting.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, so what I ended up doing was I actually hired my first nutrition coach and I just kind of like fully like invested in like and trusted her.
Yeah.
And she gave me like my initial starting numbers and I was like holy shit, like am I gonna
This is a lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm gonna definitely gain weight from doing this. I'm like,
Yeah.
just all those thoughts go through your head. But I'm like, you know what? I invested in this. I'm like, I invested in her for a reason. And I'm like, I have to
Hmm.
trust her. So I kind of dove into that. And it was for the first time in my life, I started to understand like how much I had underfueled my body before. And so
Yeah.
for the first time I was actually truly seeing like what my body needed. And for the first time I was actually fueling my body, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was pretty remarkable to see like this transformation that happened because I went from, this smaller runner, physique.
Yeah.
And then when I retired from running, I actually gained quite a bit of weight, which was necessary. Like my hormones were just in a really bad place. So
Yeah.
I ended up gaining some weight, some body fat, but then to be able to transform and, build muscle and strength over the next couple of years was pretty cool to see. Um, and, I battled for a while in there too with like body image issues with that transformation.
Yeah,
Um,
because Abby, I wanted to ask. So like I've worked with endurance athletes and I've also had, 10 plus years of eating disorder experience. I mean, that's kind of where I started in my career. And I oftentimes found that a lot of the clients that we were serving were a lot of elite level endurance athletes. And I kind of just want to go back into like you said that you had a really great season, right? So during that time as you're competing, you mentioned that you had that like all or nothing. So I want to dive into your mindset back then a little bit. So what was your mindset like? And then also, what was your relationship with your body like at that time too? Like, how did you feel in your body?
Those are really good questions. So, I mean, my mindset at that point was like just I mean, I was just like so like laser focused on
You gotta
my
be. I mean, you said 50 and
goals.
then 100-mile runs, right?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, dude, I ran I ran the Chicago Marathon in 2016 with my then girlfriend, now wife. I ended up getting a tattoo of it. Abby and I've never run again. so
That's
so like
awesome.
I definitely respect the mindset piece. So like kind of diving back in. Sorry, I interrupted you, but
No, that's
I
great.
think it's so funny that like you did it at such an elite level, and then I did it like once, and I'm like, I'm not doing this again.
I mean, I think that there's, oh gosh, like, yeah, I think I was so laser focused to like, I mean, it's a flaw, right? Where like
Yeah,
I think I lost a lot of relationships as a result, right? Because I
yeah,
was
yeah.
very selfish with my training. I mean, it was
Mhm.
always about running and,
No days
everything
off.
everything I could do to get better. And, I
Yeah.
sacrificed a lot of stuff in the process. Um, I think that I've always run or I always ran. Like my parents, like we grew up running and it was a huge part of my lifestyle.
Mhm.
And so, like, there's no doubt about it. Like, I love running, and I don't think you can run 100 miles if you don't love
Yeah.
running. However, I think over the years that kind of transpired into, me trying to like solve some like internal stuff and like deal
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
trauma through like over exercising.
Yeah.
And I think in the process, yeah, like I didn't respect my body. And
Mhm.
the end result was that like I didn't eat enough and I overtrained, and my body was left kind of like dealing with all of that.
Yeah.
So, and I think, body image, I think that I was, I was, when I look at pictures now, like I can see like I was a, very smaller person.
Yeah.
Um, but with that being said, I think I was always like a bigger endurance athlete than what you generally see. Like I always kind of had a little bit more muscle mass than some of the other girls.
Yeah.
So there was always that thought of like, hey, if I can just get thinner, if I can just lose more, in my head, if I could just lose more body fat, right, then I
Yeah.
can run faster, I can run farther, I can be more
Yeah.
efficient.
Yeah. And it's so crazy too. So I mean,
And that's as
obviously,
a dietitian, right? Like
right, yeah,
I'm supposed to
exactly.
be
So you should
smart,
know, right?
right? Yeah.
So kind of going back there, Abby, and I kind of wonder, as so for those listeners of the pod, I mean, you've heard me say this before, and Abby, this might be the first time you're hearing it. My wife is a therapist, so she's an eating disorder and trauma therapist. So becoming more like trauma aware and trauma informed, I think, is such a huge commodity when we're working on people's behaviors and also their lives. So like as you're kind of thinking back then, now that you're getting more informed about, I mean, you mentioned your trauma, right? So now that you're getting more informed about past conditioning, what do you think was your biggest asset during that time to help you get through? Was it the running, or was it more so like putting your body through a lot of stress to know that you're not made of glass? I mean, what was it for you?
I think it's all of that. I think that like if
Yeah.
I like that was like my therapy, and I know
Yeah.
that looking now, right, like there's really no replacement for actual therapy, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
um
You didn't know.
yeah, so like running to me was, going out and running for 100 miles and suffering, right? Like I was always like the person who could suffer the most. That
Yeah.
was easy to me compared to
Mhm.
like trying to like live in this life, like normal life
Yeah.
that was actually like really hard for me.
Yeah.
So, running and then over controlling like my nutrition, my intake, right? Like those
Yeah.
were that's kind of how I dealt with the problems.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, kind of thinking back during that time, I mean, what got you through? Was it the running? Was it how your body looked? I mean, there was something that was continually pushing you forward. So during that time, what got you through?
I think a lot of it is probably like my DNA. I think,
Mhm.
just my parents and the way I was raised. I mean, they're just extremely hard workers and they always instilled that in me. So
Yeah.
the other thing is like, my mom is probably like one of the most stubborn people, and it's,
Mhm.
it's a strength and it's a weakness, but
Yeah.
I mean, my stubbornness greatly helped me in running
Yeah.
events like that, where again, I could outrun, like I was just like the little energizer bunny.
Yeah.
um People would like joke around, but like I was never the most talented. I could outwork any person. I was never the fastest.
Yeah.
But the joke was that I'm just like slow and steady, and I
Yeah.
just knew how to pace myself. And other girls would go out and just go out too fast, they would blow up. So I'd be super steady, but then I
Yeah.
think it was also just like that mindset of like I will literally, if my leg falls off, I will pick my leg up and just
Keep
make it to
going.
the finish line. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think having that mindset in a lot of ways, Abby, I can really resonate with that. I think, I was speaking with a friend about a year ago about just the path of self-development and entrepreneurship. And I just got to a point where I mentioned, like, I'm at a point now with where I'm at that I'm never going to quit. And so I know in that way, like, I'm going to be fulfilled. I know in that way, like, I'm going to be successful. So I really love that you kind of touched on during those places in your life where you're like, hey, slow and steady. I know that I know that I'm gonna compete, and I know that I'm gonna win. So I really, really resonate with that. And I wonder, kind of fast forward to like this last year, you had a really, really heartwarming story that I think I read, Abby, like 5 times. And each time I was like, damn, all right, cool. Like,
Oh.
so this past year, let's kind of fast forward to this past year, obviously with the pandemic and everything else that happened. Um, what were some of those moments for you that were just life changing? I mean, you mentioned them a little bit in your content, but I wonder if you can touch on those during our pod right now. I mean, you mentioned that you lost a job during that time. You mentioned that like others had to help you. So like, can you dive into that a little bit and how that felt for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, I worked at a big box gym for like 12 plus years, and basically when gym shut down, we thought it was only going to be 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks turned into, months.
Forever.
Right. Yeah, still 2 years, right? um so I learned, in the process, we got furloughed, so we were unemployed, and my husband worked at the same facility as me, so we were both unemployed. And
Mhm.
uh, we have just such a wonderful community, like our church community specifically, Thrive Church. They just have like this outreach program where I don't even know how they know, but they sent people over, and they would drop off groceries to us occasionally. And
Mhm.
one day they came over and they brought us groceries, and they saw Molly, our little dog, and they're
Yeah.
like, "Oh man," they're like, "Molly needs some food too." And the guy came over and brought us like some dog food, and I mean, it was just such a like a humbling, like just such a humbling, but like it was a hard thing to look at, and to go from like, yeah, like this full-time gig, working there 12 plus years with,
Yeah.
full-time benefits and all this stuff, to like, oh my God, like, am I struggling to buy my dog groceries? Like,
Yeah.
I need help. Um, so that was, yeah, it was cool to see the community though, like be able to reach out. And then
Yeah.
the cool thing is that like my husband and I got involved with, being able to like give back after that, right? And be able to help
Yeah.
other people too. So
Yeah. No, I remember reading it too, Abby, and I kind of just sat back and I was like, that's really great to be able to have a community like that where everyone is just really serving everyone. And at the same time, I was sort of thinking to myself, one of the things that I really try to lean into is authenticity. And another thing that I'm constantly working through is like for me and my family, like, hey, it's not just all on me, because past conditioning told me that it was up to me, right? And so I put a lot of pressure on myself. So I remember reading that and I was like, wow, that sense of community is so amazing. And at the same time, like, gosh, I don't know how I would have done with like getting people helping me. It's just something I got to work through. So what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I think asking for help can be so hard.
So hard, right?
But I think that once you experience that, I think that it makes it easier to call on others to, to help you, and to know that, again, like, you can do that in return. And it's,
Yeah.
it's such a rewarding experience when you can, turn around and help somebody else. And,
Mhm.
I know that you and I both worked with, or I still work with Tony, but like one of the
Yeah.
big things he always talks about is like when you're like in that part of your life where you're maybe like stressing, or you feel like
Yeah.
financially like things are not where you want them to be, he always says like the best thing you can do is you can give to others.
Yeah.
And when you do that, right, then it's like all these other like doors open, and all of a sudden you have these different opportunities, or all of a sudden like you're blessed with other things that,
Hmm.
they it seems kind of random maybe to some people, but like I just feel like that's, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of like I don't know, the Holy Spirit or something working.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to the random act of kindness, right? They already know from studies how important that is towards just the psyche. So yeah, shout out to Tony if you ever listen to this, man. I owe so much to you, bro. So obviously we've shared that kind of journey together. So coming from where you came, where a community really helped you out during that time. I mean, 12 years being at the big box gym, and then all of a sudden no more benefits, and you're just trying to figure it out. So Abby, what pushed you to start going out on your own, and how has that process been?
Yeah, I think that like the biggest push was my husband.
Yeah.
I mean, so they had like eliminated my position going back to that gym, and they did tell me, they're like, well, you can still come back, and basically you'll do the same job but with far less pay.
Yeah.
And I just felt like I knew my worth as a dietitian, and I felt like um so many of my clients had left,
Yeah.
or they weren't comfortable coming back. And so I'm like, I can go back and like rebuild my business and give, part of my shares to the CEO of the company. Or,
Hmm.
is this God like pushing me to, after 12 years, like it's time to move on and time to be your own boss. But
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of like apprehension on my behalf. And
Yeah.
my husband was super supportive, and he's like, I think that this is what you need to do. And initially I was like looking for other, part-time jobs to kind of like fill in the gap, and
Yeah.
um, got enrolled in like Tony's thing, and kind of learned how to do online coaching. And then my business just kind of took off, and it was pretty cool to not have to have another job, right? And to be able
Yeah.
to do this and to impact other people like on a full-time basis.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's such an empowering thing. I mean, I think with a lot of the guests that I've had on, Abby, we've really dove into, as you are making it, right? As you're creating this life that you feel so proud of, going back into the moments where self-doubt has creeped in, going back into the moments where imposter syndrome. So can you speak on those moments and what got you through? Because it's something that across the board I'm constantly hearing and I can resonate with. So can you touch on those things?
I think again, it probably goes back to like support system and having people sometimes that believe in you, right? Even when you don't believe in yourself. And I think
Yeah.
for me, I think that was probably my husband, and he's just like this overly like positive person.
We all need
Which
those.
we do. Sometimes it can be annoying, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just want to complain, and he'll always like bring out the best in the situation. But
Yeah.
one of the things that he always says is like, well, because I always come up with like a million reasons why it wouldn't work. And, what
Mhm.
if this happens, or what if this happens? And, he always just calmly says, like, what if it does? Like, what if it does happen? What if, yeah,
Yeah.
what if you're successful? What if you don't need another job and this is what you're doing? So
Yeah. So when we kind of touch on that, Abby, so if we could, like, what are some of the things that you tell yourself? Because obviously it sounds like you got a great support system with your husband, and shout out to him because I oftentimes have to be that person. It's like just positivity. So what are some of the things that you've told yourself throughout this process? In the realm of imposter syndrome or self doubt that like other listeners and viewers could really resonate with.
I think sometimes it's like having the conversation either with somebody or with yourself, and sometimes like asking yourself like what's the worst that could happen,
Hmm.
and talking through that, and sometimes understanding that like some of the things that you're like envisioning as far as like what's the worst that can happen, some of it's pretty unrealistic, like that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
But just understanding like that yes, this could happen, but these are the things that we're doing to, I don't know, to better support you so that if something like that happens, like, here's what you can do.
Yeah.
Or but I think a lot of times, like even when I think about like my clients, right? So people who are trying to get stronger or improve body composition, right? And I think a lot of times in their heads they come up with these reasons why they can't be successful.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just asking them like, well, has that ever happened before? Or has anyone ever actually said that to you before? And sometimes it's just understanding that it's just a lot of just junk that you're feeding yourself that has no like validity to it.
Yeah, it's like checking out those stories, and I kind of wonder, Abby, like you mentioned that during the time of like having this career as a runner, that was your therapy, not really knowing at the time that you actually needed therapy. So I kind
Yeah.
of wonder, like, obviously this podcast is about the hero's journey and also the habits. What has therapy meant to you, and what have been some of the biggest nuggets? Because I feel like you just touched on one right there, checking out stories.
Yeah. So what's my therapy been? I mean, I think removing myself from some of those negative things in my life, and it's a lot of times like I'll tell my clients like, the scale can be a tool, right, that we can
Yeah.
use. It's one tool, right? If you're weighing yourself and that's not serving you,
Hmm.
right? Like you're going and it's becoming like a negative thing, it's ruining your day, whatever that looks like, then we need to remove the scale, at least
Hmm.
for a time being, right? And so for me, it was removing those things that weren't serving me. And so
Yeah.
running, extreme running, endurance running, it wasn't serving me. I had to get away from that.
Hmm.
I got into lifting, I got into like competitive powerlifting, and went to powerlifting nationals, and um, all the while I was really, I think, still kind of like a little bit too hyper focused on that stuff, right? Like it was
Yeah.
almost like a OCD type thing. And was really into like tracking my foods and weighing stuff in order to make weight for the meets. And I
Yeah.
ended up getting hurt. I hurt my back just training, and it was at that moment that really thought to myself like, this sport has helped me a lot. It got me away from kind of that endurance overtraining.
Yeah.
It really helped me to like get strong and to really kind of like think more about like the weight on the barbell versus the weight on the scale.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, I was still too focused on like the food and probably doing too much work at the gym.
Yeah.
So I decided to step away from the competitive powerlifting, and um, step away from some of those things that just like no longer serve me. Looking at certain friendships in my life, and kind of stepping away from some of those relationships that weren't serving me either.
Yeah. Yeah, because I wonder too, and this is oftentimes kind of what we see when we're like helping people with their mental health journey, right? It's kind of like whack-a-mole. You have this thing that you're struggling with, and so you get that, you get rid of that, and then something else comes up,
Yeah, that's
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Right. So like I wonder as you kind of went from like that competitive running to now to then competitive lifting, there's still a drive inside of you, right? You have that athlete's mindset. So what have you replaced, not replaced, but where is that energy gone now?
Balance. I mean, really just like enjoying life, and
Yeah.
for the first time in a really long time, like just being able to um yeah, to have balance and moderation, and to truly like listen to my body and respect it, and like take care of my body out of that place of like love and respect, versus like, in the past, the shit that I did was just harmful, and
Yeah.
it was coming out of a place of like hate and
Yeah.
self-hate, right? So yeah, like just truly for the first time ever, like loving myself, and being really happy with where I'm at, and not being focused on things like the scale, or just like how many abs I have or anything
Yeah.
like that, right? It's
Yeah.
just having fun, and um still trying to be strong, but
Yeah.
still able to get outside in Colorado, right, and hike up mountains and do all
Yeah.
that fun stuff.
Well, it sounds, Abby, that there's been an evolution of putting yourself through the rigor of competitive sport into now just really seeing an evolution in your competitive life now. It seems like that balance has come in. And I wonder, again, the podcast is about habits and people's heroes journey. You mentioned God and your faith a couple times, right? And so I kind of wonder for you, like, what is your faith and spirituality meant to you? And why is that important for you?
I think it's something that I mean, in this evolution, I mean, I think that, gosh, like I grew up Catholic, and when I
Same.
okay. And I just remember like my last experience at a Catholic church was with some of my family members, and it felt like the service was like 10 hours, and it was probably like 1 or 2 hours, right? But
Yeah.
at the end of it, I was like, what the heck just happened? Like, what did I just learn? Like, what did I get from
Yeah.
that? And, um, I said that to one of the family members, and they're like, well, it's not about what you learn. It's, the fact that like you're here, and that
Yeah.
you're just kind of showing face. And I was like, well, I was like, I don't feel
Yeah.
great about that. And I eventually connected with a good friend, one of my clients, and she told me about the church, Thrive Church, and it's a Christian church. And I went to that, and it's just been like really just kind of night and day from like how I grew up. And it's
Mhm.
just been so much easier for me to like connect and like, I don't know, build relationships with God and the community. And it's something I've never had before. And so it's neat to have that aspect, and to like be able to, whether it's like you're showing up in person or you're like listening online, but to be able to like get something from that, and
Yeah.
to be able to apply that to your life.
Well, Abby, do you feel like your spirituality and your faith has created opportunities for you to show up more authentically in just the things that you're involved in?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I wonder if it's again going back to like your past lives. I mean, you've been competitive at everything, and now you're just meant to be, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so I kind of wonder again, this is the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. So like for you, and I really love touching on these with any guest that we have. And so I got a couple questions for you that are not, they're not scripted, but it's a theme that we're doing. So um, first question for you is obviously it's Can't Believe I Made It podcast. So do you think that you've made it? And if not, what would it look like to make it for you?
Oh, geez. I mean, I feel like that's a trick question. I feel like yes and no. I mean, I feel like obviously we've talked about like this evolution, and I feel like I am just finally in a spot where I just, really love life and love myself, and
Mhm.
um can finally like be me, and like be me authentically, like we've talked about. But at the same time, I feel like I'm just kind of getting started. So
Yeah.
I feel like I haven't truly made it, and I feel like there's so much more impact that I can make, and that, we as dietitians can make in this world. So I don't know. I'm going to say yes and no.
Yeah. I mean, it's meant to be a trick question because most of our other guests, too, it's been pretty similar. And for our listeners out there, if you're listening up to this point, I just want to share there's a theme with these high performers talking about their journey when they're getting to that point where they're feeling really comfortable and in their evolution, they're getting to a place where they are talking about self-love. They're getting to a place where they're seeing an evolution of unlearning things that were not serving them. And they're
Mhm.
seeing an evolution of getting to be their most authentic selves. So, Abby, I know up to this point, you haven't heard any of the other guests, but I do want to tell you that there is a theme. And so I'm so glad, without even you listening, that you went there. So I'm kind of wondering, going back over your story, what habits or what things do you attribute helping you to get to where you are right now?
I think, I think one of the best things that I learned, from ultra running, and I'm always like a geek when it comes to like taking like those metaphors from sports and
Yeah.
obviously looking at them from like life perspective. But one of my amazing coaches that I had with running prior to this 100-mile race, he was telling me it was like a pretty like high pressured race, and he told me, he's like, you know what, he's like, don't focus on your time, right? Like, don't focus on like the time that you want to run. He said, focus on taking care of yourself and doing the things that you need to do throughout the race in order to, to make it to the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like the best race of my life. And it was like this breakout race for me.
Yeah.
And I think, what I learned from that and what I really, always share with my clients too is like, hey, don't focus on that outcome or
Yeah.
the number or the size that you want to be or the weight that you want to lift. It's focused on like those daily habits and behaviors, right?
Yeah.
That get us to that outcome. And so, when you think about a 100-mile race or you think about lifting really heavy weights, it's doing just being consistent, right? Like just showing up every day and putting in the reps, whether that's,
Yeah.
running, lifting, whether it's in your your marriage, your relationship, your children,
Yes.
your faith, right? It's doing all those small things every day and taking care of yourself and taking care of others.
Gosh. So again, I mean, this isn't Abby. You're amazing. You haven't heard any of the guests
I haven't.
up to this point,
Go
right?
back.
But I do want to share. We got another one dropping this Friday. I do want to share that there with our listeners out there that have listened up to this point. There's a theme here. So I'm always talking about this, Abby, and I'm so glad that you mentioned this. I am really pouring into people and helping them to understand that if they're constantly focusing on the outcome, it stills the joy of the process. And in part of that process, you are supposed to fall in love with the habits. And so, again, I just think it's really cool and serendipitous that you mentioned it without even hearing some of the other guests, because for our listeners out there, success leaves clues. And I think this is a really good example with what Abby just touched on for you to start stepping out with more authenticity. So, my God, Abby, you have been great and been so consistent without even hearing the other ones. That's like, it gives me so much joy that people are talking about the same things. So I absolutely appreciate you. Before I let you go, I got a couple questions for you. Right. So that first one was, one of the scripted ones. Here's the second one. All right. So I want to put you in the mindset of like heroes, right? Because it's a podcast about the hero's journey. So it can be comic, it can be a movie character that you really resonate with. So, in reference to heroes, who is your hero comparison and why?
Oh gosh.
I'm just throwing stuff at you right now.
Um, Golly. I mean, I don't, I'm terrible with like movies and stuff like that. So, and this is probably like not what you're looking for, but in all honesty, I feel like my heroes and like I don't want to say who I compare myself to, but like I think that who I strive to be more like would be my folks, my parents, my mom and my
Okay.
dad. And yeah, I think that they're the heroes and they're truly like, again, like the DNA of like,
Yeah.
why I'm here and why I sometimes do what I do. But I would say that yeah, those guys are my heroes.
So no, that's absolutely okay because it's so funny. So a couple episodes ago, Teresa mentioned the same thing. Like she had an actual person who was like her hero comparison. So, what about your parents make them your heroes?
Oh gosh, everything. I mean, just the work ethic, right? I mean, that's huge. I mean, work ethic, the compassion, right? I mean, I've got three sisters, so just
Oh, dang.
how they raised us, and just the life lessons that they've given us.
Hmm.
I think hardworking is probably just the biggest thing. I mean,
Hmm.
they just raised us as kids to to bust our asses, and
Yeah.
um, in a good way. And I think that my folks always just encouraged us to like be the best we could be, to study hard, to to be in sports, to work hard, and then to be able to enjoy that down the road.
Yeah. Well, it's really joyous to hear that some of the characteristics that you really respect about your parents is obviously compassion and then being hardworking. As listeners and people who are going to start following you, going to start connecting with you, it's really cool that we get to see the product of a lot of the work that you've done and the evolution that you've been able to experience, Abby. So, my friend, I appreciate so much about you and your story. So, before I let you go, where can people find you? And yeah, let us know that.
Okay. Well, before I say that, like, thanks so much for having me here. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. And
100%.
I'm excited to listen to those other podcasts. But you guys can find me. Instagram is at Abby McPabby. And then on Facebook, it's my full name. So Abby McQuenney Penamonte. And then my website is coachingwithabby.com.
Oh, I love it. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes for our listeners out there. Again, Abby's does such a really great job about telling her story. And there's just so much that I really enjoyed about the past 40 or so minutes. So, Abby, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And yeah, I appreciate you.
Absolutely. All right. Bye, listeners. I'll catch you on the next one.